One actress shattered a mirror on set because a director gave her a single note. Another threatened to walk off $1 million production over the color of a co-star's costume. Fistfights, screaming matches, and on-set tantrums weren't rare, they were routine. These stars didn't just have tempers, they had reputations that terrified everyone around them. And wait until you hear who made even studio heads too afraid to speak. This is 16 old Hollywood stars who had the worst possible tempers, and the most unhinged one will leave you in shock. Bette Davis, the eyes that could burn holes through steel. Bette Davis didn't need to raise her voice to terrify a room. Her stare alone could cut through solid ego. Her fury was refined, cold, and deliberate. If a co-star dared to fumble a line or steal a glance at the camera, Davis would pause, tilt her head ever so slightly, and deliver a line so venomous it didn't need volume. Her wrath wasn't wild, it was surgical. Directors learned quickly. If you didn't have your act together, Bette would let you know with a glare that could leave a grown man rattled. And if you crossed her twice, you'd likely never work with her again. She demanded precision, not out of vanity, but because acting was war and Davis came armed with a full arsenal. She was known to dismiss entire performances as amateur hour without blinking, and if she didn't like the script, she'd rewrite the damn thing herself, right there on set. She clashed with producers, mocked co-stars behind their backs, and sometimes to their faces, and famously ignited one of Hollywood's fiercest rivalries with Joan Crawford that scorched the industry for decades. Bette Davis didn't throw tantrums, she launched silent, calculated power plays. Her temper didn't explode, it invaded. And in a town full of loud mouths, she proved that the quietest rage is often the most dangerous. Joan Crawford, the queen of control, and God help you if you crossed her. Joan Crawford didn't just demand respect, she expected submission. Every moment on set was her court, and she ruled it with an iron stare and a porcelain smile that could turn to ice without warning. If Bette Davis was surgical, Joan was relentless, enforcing her standards with the precision of a general and the pride of a monarch. Crew members whispered about her impossible demands. The lighting had to be just right, the camera could only shoot from approved angles, and her co-stars were often required to stand on boxes so she wouldn't appear taller. But the real storm came when anyone dared question her. If a director gave notes she didn't like, she'd quietly finish the scene, then storm off set and refuse to return until her authority was re-established. No shouting, no drama, just sheer, icy defiance. Crawford's temper wasn't wild and unpredictable. It was methodical, sharpened by decades of climbing her way out of poverty and into the Hollywood elite. She had sacrificed everything for her image, and that image was sacred. Anyone who threatened it, even slightly, would feel the full force of her wrath. Off camera, she kept score. In interviews, in contracts, in casting rooms, Joan Crawford was always calculating, always ready to strike. And when she finally did, it was often too late for her target to fight back. In the world of old Hollywood, she wasn't just a star, she was a storm system. And no one stayed dry. Errol Flynn, charm like champagne, rage like dynamite. To the public, Errol Flynn was the ultimate swashbuckler, devilishly handsome, impossibly charming, always ready with a smirk and a sword. But behind the scenes, that roguish grin could vanish in an instant, replaced by a flash of fury that made even seasoned directors flinch. Flynn's temper wasn't slow burning, it was detonated. 1 second he was laughing with the crew, the next he was flipping over furniture or storming off set, leaving chaos in his wake. He loathed authority, ignored direction, and made it clear to everyone around him. You work around Errol Flynn, not the other way around. If a scene didn't go his way, he wouldn't argue, he'd sabotage it. He'd purposely flub takes, mock lines, or stare straight into the lens just to spite the director. If he thought someone was undermining him, he didn't talk out, he unleashed. Rumors swirled of screaming matches behind closed doors and violent confrontations that left people rattled for days. Flynn didn't hide his temper behind professionalism or diplomacy. He wore it like a badge, part of his mythos. That unpredictability, the same thing that made his on-screen characters so electric, made working with him a ticking time bomb. There were two sides to Errol Flynn, the dashing hero who lit up the screen, and the tempestuous force behind it who could destroy a production with one explosive mood swing. And when the charm wore off, everyone knew it was time to clear the set. Humphrey Bogart, the growl wasn't just an act. Humphrey Bogart didn't pretend to be tough, he was tough. That gravel-lined voice and no-nonsense glare weren't a performance. They were a reflection of a man who had no time for nonsense and zero patience for incompetence. On set, he was sharp, cutting, and brutally honest, a professional who expected the same from everyone around him. But when that standard wasn't met, the growl turned to a roar. Bogart's temper wasn't loud for the sake of drama. It was controlled, almost strategic. He didn't scream for attention. He cut with words so precise, they could stop a room cold. A poorly written line. Rewrite it, or I won't say it. A director fumbling through his vision? Figure it out, or I'm gone. There was no hand-holding, no sugarcoating, just raw, unfiltered disdain for anything beneath his standard. He especially hated pretenders, actors who care more about their hair than their lines, producers who confused money with taste, studio heads who tried to push him around. With Bogart, there was no middle ground. You were either sharp and serious, or disposable. Off-camera, his wit was as fast as his temper. Co-stars were often stunned at how quickly he could turn from quiet professionalism to withering sarcasm if provoked. He didn't throw tantrums, he dismantled egos. For all his talent, Bogart wasn't easy. He didn't play the Hollywood game, he played his game. And if you didn't bring your A-game with him, you were already losing. James Cagney, the gentleman who could snap like a street brawler. James Cagney looked like the kind of guy who could punch his way out of a back alley, and sometimes that's exactly how he behaved. But what made his temper truly dangerous was how unexpected it could be. Off-screen, he was polite, thoughtful, even gracious, until something crossed the invisible line. And then, the gentleman vanished, and the street-tough kid from the Lower East Side took over. Cagney didn't suffer fools, and he especially couldn't stand phoniness. If he sensed arrogance or dishonesty, the transformation was instant. He'd slam scripts on tables, throw chairs across rehearsal spaces, or deliver blistering rants that left cast and crew too stunned to speak. He didn't care if you were a rookie or a studio exec. If you disrespected the craft, he'd let you have it. Unlike many of his volatile peers, Cagney rarely lost control without cause. His temper wasn't theatrical, it was personal. He saw acting as an honest, working man's trade, and when someone treated it like a playground for ego or vanity, he took it as a deep offense. That's when a man who played gangsters so convincingly reminded everyone those scenes weren't much of stretch. And if a director ever tried to strong-arm him, Cagney would dig in his heels, cross his arms, and in a voice barely above a whisper say, "Then you'll have to find yourself another actor." He wasn't the loudest storm in Hollywood, but when he hit, nothing got left standing. Barbara Stanwyck, steel wrapped in silk. Barbara Stanwyck didn't throw tantrums. She didn't shout. She didn't storm off sets or smash props. Her temper was different, quieter, deadlier, and impossible to forget. Where others exploded, Stanwyck tightened the reins. And that control, that cold surgical calm, it terrified people. She came from nothing, orphaned young, hardened by the world long before she ever stepped into a studio. That toughness stayed with her, molded her, and built a force of will that could slice through the thickest Hollywood ego. When something infuriated her, lazy actors, sloppy direction, condescension, she wouldn't yell. She'd go still. Her eyes would lock on the target. And with perfect posture and perfect timing, she'd deliver a line that felt less like criticism and more like a verbal guillotine. Directors respected her, but they feared her too. She never forgot a slight, never forgave mediocrity. And she wasn't above letting someone know they were replaceable, usually in front of the entire crew. But it wasn't cruelty. It was standard. Stanwyck showed up prepared, precise, and professional, and if you didn't match her, you didn't belong. She didn't need headlines or scandals. Her power was in presence. You didn't mess with Barbara Stanwyck, not because she'd scream, but because she wouldn't have to. In an industry full of loud tempers and flailing egos, she was the kind of storm that arrives without a sound and leaves wreckage in its wake. Frank Sinatra, the velvet voice with a hair-trigger fuse. Frank Sinatra didn't just have a temper, he had a reputation. A whisper of his arrival could make a room straighten up. Directors, producers, waiters, strangers, everyone knew that the wrong look, the wrong word, the wrong vibe could light him up in a heartbeat. Sinatra was charm and chaos in equal measure. One moment, he'd be crooning smooth as silk, making everyone feel like the center of the universe. The next, he was flipping tables, firing off insults like bullets, or cutting lifelong ties with someone over a perceived slight. And it didn't take much, being late, being arrogant, or just being in the way. Frank expected loyalty, perfection, and respect. Violate even one of those, and you'd see just how fast Blue Eyes could turn into someone you didn't want to know. It wasn't always shouting, sometimes it was worse. Silent snubs, cold shoulders, careers quietly dismantled by a phone call or a conversation in the right or wrong room. His mood could turn an entire set into a war zone. He walked out on directors mid-shot, refused to do second takes, and demanded reshoots when he didn't like how he looked, not how he acted. But here's the thing. When Frank was on your side, he was fiercely loyal. When he wasn't, you'd better start packing. Sinatra didn't burn bridges. He blew them to hell. And when he turned on someone, Hollywood felt the aftershocks for years. Clark Gable, the king who didn't take orders. Clark Gable didn't throw fits. He laid down law. Known as the King of Hollywood, Gable walked onto every set like he owned the place. And in many ways, he did. That rugged charm and confident swagger weren't an act. They were the armor of a man who didn't tolerate nonsense, didn't respond well to criticism, and sure as hell didn't take direction from anyone he didn't respect. When Gable lost his temper, it wasn't theatrical. It was physical. He'd kick over lighting equipment, bark at crew members in front of the entire cast, or storm off the set with a door slam that echoed across the soundstage. He had no patience for delays, weak scripts, or, worst of all, actors who didn't take the work seriously. To him, being unprepared was a personal insult. Directors had to tread carefully. Gable could be cooperative, even generous, if he respected the person in charge. But once that respect cracked, he'd shut down entirely. He'd deliver lines cold, stop showing up to rehearsals, or make it painfully clear he was doing the film a favor just by being there. But what truly set him off? Being treated like anything less than a star. He knew his worth, and he expected the room to reflect it. The crown may have been invisible, but everyone felt its weight. Clark Gable didn't raise his voice to prove a point. He was the point. And if you forgot that, you only forgot once. Orson Welles, the boy wonder who burned bridges as fast as he'd built them. Orson Welles didn't just direct films, he demanded obedience from them. He was a prodigy, a visionary, a force of nature in a dinner jacket. But behind that booming voice and poetic charm was a powder keg of frustration, pride, and perfectionism that could ignite in seconds. Welles didn't explode like others, he erupted. And when he did, he took everything with him. He would rewrite entire scripts overnight, fire cinematographers mid-scene, or trash studio notes without even reading them. He believed no one understood his vision better than he did, and he made sure everyone around him knew it. Actors on his sets often walked a tightrope. One moment, he'd praise a performance as brilliant. The next, he'd unleash a tirade over a missed beat or a misunderstood line. His anger wasn't just loud, it was devastating. He'd humiliate collaborators in front of the crew, then disappear for hours while everyone scrambled to pick up the pieces. Studios feared him, not just for his temper, but for the fallout it left behind. He fought with producers, burned through budgets, and walked away from projects the second he felt betrayed. And make no mistake, Welles took things personally. He never forgot a slight, and he never forgave artistic compromise. He created masterpieces. He destroyed alliances. And when he got angry, which was often, the brilliance turned brutal. Working with Orson Welles was like working with a lightning storm. Beautiful, powerful, and always just one spark away from disaster. Kirk Douglas, a chin like granite, and a temper to match. Kirk Douglas didn't just play intense characters, he was one. Every glare, every growled line, every burst of fury on screen came straight from the man himself. His temper wasn't an accident of personality. It was a weapon, sharpened by ambition, and honed through years of fighting his way up from nothing. On set, Douglas demanded excellence, not politely, not diplomatically, but forcefully. If someone missed a cue or slacked on a scene, he'd let them know with blistering precision. He had a voice like a blade and eyes that could stop you mid-sentence. He'd confront directors in front of the crew, shout down producers, and push co-stars to their breaking point. Not because he was careless, because he cared too much. Douglas believed in the work, deeply, but he believed in his own vision more. And when those two collided, sparks flew. He was known to rewrite scenes, override directors, and take creative control even when it wasn't his job. And if anyone resisted, the gloves came off. He wasn't interested in small talk or smoothing things over. He wanted the scene right, and he wanted it now. What made his temper so fierce was its intensity. It wasn't about ego, it was about command. He didn't just want to lead the scene, he wanted to own it. Working with Kirk Douglas meant walking into a war zone, one where the general was charismatic, brilliant, and absolutely ruthless when crossed. Marlon Brando, Genius on screen, chaos off it. Marlon Brando didn't explode in the traditional sense. His temper didn't follow rules because Brando didn't follow rules. His fury came in strange, disarming waves, sometimes passive, sometimes volcanic, often surreal. One minute he was silent and aloof, the next he was flipping over tables, walking off set, or refusing to come out of his trailer for days. His anger wasn't about noise, it was about control. Brando hated being told what to do. Directors quickly learned they weren't working with an actor, they were wrangling a force of nature. If he didn't like a scene, he'd mumble his way through it, or throw out the dialogue entirely. If he thought the camera angle was wrong, he'd shift his body to block the shot. And if he was in a mood, production simply stopped. He was brilliant, no doubt, magnetic, instinctive, endlessly creative. But that brilliance came at a cost. His moods dictated the energy of the entire set. When he was engaged, the performance was electric. But when the temper took over, everything fell apart. What made Brando's rage so maddening was its unpredictability. He'd smile at a director one moment, then sabotage a scene the next. He'd give the performance of a lifetime, then refuse to do a second take just to prove a point. Brando didn't play the Hollywood game. He flipped the board over and walked away. And if you couldn't keep up, that was your problem, not his. Joan Fontaine, a smile with a blade behind it. Joan Fontaine had the face of an angel and the patience of a ticking clock. Behind her poised demeanor and delicate voice was a simmering temper that revealed itself not in explosions, but in precision strikes. Cold, calculated, and laced with elegance, Fontaine's anger was the kind that lingered long after the words were spoken. She was known for her elegance on screen, but behind the scenes, Joan could be icy, even ruthless, when crossed. She held grudges like heirlooms, and her fury wasn't theatrical, it was strategic. Her most infamous feud? Her own sister, Olivia de Havilland, a sibling rivalry so toxic it became legend. They didn't just fight, they erased each other. They refused to speak, wouldn't attend the same events, and when one won an award, the other didn't clap. On set, Fontaine could be difficult but not loud. She didn't yell, she dismissed. Directors who didn't meet her expectations were ignored. Co-stars she disliked? She froze them out completely. She once walked off a set for being bored and would often demand rewrites if she thought her character was beneath her, or worse, upstaged. Joan's temper was like a scalpel. No mess, just blood. Her revenge was quiet but thorough. If she decided you were beneath her, it wasn't a disagreement, it was a sentence. And once you were cut from Joan Fontaine's world, you were gone for good. Olivia de Havilland, grace under pressure. Until the pressure broke. Olivia de Havilland may have looked like the picture of composure, but behind those refined features and polished words was a will so unbending it could snap steel. Her temper wasn't explosive in the traditional sense. It was legal, strategic, and devastating. When Olivia was pushed too far, she didn't scream, she went to war. She famously took on Warner Brothers in a battle that most actresses of her time wouldn't dare touch. The studio tried to trap her in a cycle of endless contract extensions, and she fought back in court. And won. That landmark case, the de Havilland Law, changed the industry forever. But didn't come without a price, or a firestorm of fury behind the scenes. Olivia's rage came out in absolute refusal. Refusing to be mistreated. Refusing to be typecast. Refusing to play nice. And if anyone, director, producer, or co-star, underestimated her, they quickly learned. She wasn't just tough, she was unyielding. She carried herself with grace, but she could slice through egos with a glance. Her feud with Sister Joan Fontaine was more than family drama. It was a lifelong, ice-cold Cold War. And on set, she expected the same discipline from others that she gave herself. Anyone who didn't take the work seriously, she'd shut them down with quiet authority and leave no room for argument. Olivia didn't throw fits. She built cases. And when she finally struck, the silence afterward was deafening. Edward G. Robinson, 5'5", all fury. Edward G. Robinson didn't need height to dominate a room. His presence commanded it. Compact, fiery, and utterly unshakable, Robinson had a temper that moved faster than a camera shutter. His on-screen gangster grit wasn't just performance, it was personality. And if things didn't go his way, you could feel the walls tighten. Robinson was a perfectionist, fiercely intelligent, sharp-tongued, and intolerant of anything less than excellence. He didn't raise his voice for drama. He raised it like a hammer. If a fellow actor flubbed a line, Robinson would snap, loudly, and with pinpoint insults that left egos in tatters. He had no patience for laziness and zero tolerance for disrespect. He saw acting as a craft a responsibility, and he expected everyone else on set to carry that same weight. Directors who arrived unprepared were dressed down in front of the crew. Producers who meddled with his performance got letters, phone calls, and sometimes visits they didn't soon forget. When Robinson boiled over, it wasn't theatrical rage, it was a lecture delivered with bullets. Even more dangerous. He held grudges. Quiet ones. He could be professional to your face and blacklist you in a heartbeat. Years later, people still found themselves frozen out of projects by the ripple effects of one bad day with Robinson. He didn't explode like others, he scorched. And once his temper found you, there wasn't a fire extinguisher in Hollywood strong enough to put out. Tallulah Bankhead, a hurricane in heels. Tallulah Bankhead didn't walk onto a set, she stormed onto it. She was electric, unfiltered, and completely uncontrollable. If most stars manage their tempers behind closed doors, Tallulah tore the doors off their hinges and dared anyone to tell her to calm down. Her temper wasn't calculated, it was carnival chaos. And it came wrapped in designer gowns, cigarette smoke, and one of the sharpest tongues Hollywood ever endured. She was a one-woman whirlwind of talent and temper, capable of charming the room one moment and detonating it the next. Directors never knew which Tallulah was walking in that day, the brilliant scene stealer or the holy terror who would roast the script, the crew, and her co-stars all before the lunch break. She was infamous for stopping rehearsals mid-line to deliver blistering commentary on the dialogue, the lighting, or the competence of the man in the director's chair. And when she got angry, she didn't simmer, she let it fly. Full volume, profanity-laced tirades that echoed off studio walls and became legend. But the real trick? She made it look fun. Her rage was theatrical, almost operatic, but the damage it left behind was all too real. She broke rules, burned bridges, and laughed in the face of studio politics. She was impossible to direct, harder to ignore, and completely unforgettable. Tallulah Bankhead didn't have a temper, she was one. A beautiful, blazing, unstoppable storm that left scorched earth wherever she passed. Betty Hutton, the blonde bombshell who detonated daily. Betty Hutton didn't just light up a room, she set it on fire. Bursting with energy, voice like a cannon, smile as bright as a spotlight, and a temper that could flip a soundstage upside down. She was unpredictable, emotionally volatile, and when she hit her breaking point, there was no pulling her back. On screen, Hutton radiated joy and chaos in equal measure, all singing, all dancing larger than life. But behind the scenes, she was one of the most difficult stars to handle. Not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much, too loudly, and all the time. When she felt unheard, she'd make sure no one else could speak. If she felt slighted by a line, a camera angle, a co-star, her anger would come out full throttle. Tears, shouting, slam doors, and ultimatums. Directors learned to expect at least one meltdown per production. Producers braced for rewrites, walkouts, and emotional monologues in dressing rooms. She'd quit a movie mid-shoot if she didn't feel respected, only to return the next day as if nothing happened, until the next eruption. Her highs were exhilarating, her lows exhausting. There was no middle ground with Hutton. She was all or nothing, devotion or destruction. And while her talent was undeniable, so was her temperament, and it eventually chased away the very spotlight she'd once commanded. Betty Hutton was lightning in a bottle, but the bottle never held for long. And there you have it. 16 legends from Hollywood's golden age, each one unforgettable, not just for their performances, but for the fire they brought behind the scenes. Their tempers weren't always graceful, and at times they left real wreckage behind. But they were never boring. They were driven, flawed, fiercely human, and sometimes that very intensity was the source of their brilliance. These stars weren't afraid to push back. Against studios, against scripts, against anyone who underestimated them. Their outbursts were often explosive, but they came from a place of passion, ambition, and an unrelenting need to be taken seriously in an industry that constantly tried to control them. For better or worse, their tempers helped define them, and in some cases, define an entire era of filmmaking. Without them, Hollywood might have been quieter, but it wouldn't have been nearly as compelling. So now it's your turn. Which of these stories surprised you the most? Who do you think had most legendary temper of them all? Or maybe you think someone was left off this list, someone who burned just as brightly and just as hot. Leave a comment and let your voice be part of the conversation. And if you enjoyed this look behind the curtain of old Hollywood, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. There's more drama, more secrets, and more untold stories still to come. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.